with his antivirus, his first customers were, the government, CIA, FBI. And so I believe it was about April of 2012 when he said he was visited by some representatives of the Belizean government who who asked him if he was willing to donate $2 million to a campaign or just to these officials, and they would dole it out to whomever. But the specifics weren't given of who, I guess, they were asking the money for. But they said, they would give him perks around the island, land, women, whatever it was that he wanted for this donation. And he declined. And he said about a week later, his property was raided by the GSU, which is the gang suppression unit, and they destroyed his laboratory. So he was actually working on a topical antivirus, which is pretty cool in keeping with his antivirus that he created for computers. And they ended up arresting him they said he had a gun that wasn't registered, that he didn't have a license for, but then he was able to produce the license, so they let him go, drop that charge. And then about a week or so after the raid on his property, he said those same representatives came back to him and said and asked him if he had changed his mind about his donation. And, obviously he told him to get the F off my property. And so he said from there, that started the war, I guess, if you will, with the government, because he went on a mission to try to find evidence that they set him up for the raid because he wanted an apology. What he decided to do was donate computers, laptops to some of the secretaries of the high up officials within the government. And on these computers, he had keystroke logging information.
The FBI was hacked a month ago by a 15-year-old boy who walked off with thousands of personnel records, including undercover agents. And you're telling me you're going to keep this safe? You can't, sir. It is not possible.
So obviously a way for him to get into their systems through these laptops. And so instead of him finding evidence of this raid that they set him up for, he instead found out evidence of drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, murder for hire, all sorts of illegal activities that were being handled or done by some of these top officials. And so when he found out that information, obviously he knew he had a little bit of a bigger problem, if they would have found out. But that's exactly what happened. They found out.
We live in an age, Larry, where our government is completely illiterate in cybersecurity. We're a good 20 years behind the Chinese and the Russians, and the next war is not going to be fought with nuclear weapons. It will be a cyber war.
So he had women that were going through the information to find out things relevant to John. And so one of the women was actually sleeping with someone within the police department. And they were just chatting, after, kind of pillow talk or whatever. And she shared with him what she was doing for John. And that's how they found out. And that's when he had to go on the run within Belize during the whole summer leading up to the murder of his neighbor. And so he had a property on San Pedro Island. And he would bounce between his properties, kind of hiding out because he would get word that there was, an attack coming, or they were going to try to come and collect him. So he was already on the run before his neighbor was murdered. And what he explained to me about the murder of his neighbor is that he felt like it was a botched hit, like someone was sent to murder him, but they went to the wrong house and they got the wrong American, because they lived next to each other, but obviously on the beach, there was obviously some miles between their homes, but their homes were, next to each other. And so that's what he believed happened, was a botched murder. And then obviously we know everything that happened after that, him being deported from Guatemala back to America. Obviously, because of, as I explained to you, what happened with John and him collecting this information, he didn't want to be questioned by them because he felt he would be in grave danger if he ever was collected by them. We flew to Germany. He gave his passport. Everything was fine. There was no flag on his passport. They didn't detain him for anything. He was going to be flying to Turkey. And all of a sudden now his passport, he said, was flagged as stolen. And so that's why they detained him. And then it was the next day But then this warrant came up, and all of a sudden now he had this warrant um, that was issued to Interpol, and so then from him being detained because they thought his passport was stolen, it then became him being held for extradition to America. Okay, so there was no desperation from John, like, oh, this is it. I just have to end it all. There was no feeling of that, even on the day, because I spoke to him every day while he was in prison. He got 3 calls a day. Um, they were 8 minutes apiece. So we spoke. We spoke twice that day. And we spoke in the morning before he went to court, and we spoke in the afternoon after he came back from court. And he was obviously disappointed with their decision. But as I said, it was not a surprise.
If only 1/10 of what I'm saying is true, then I'm going to go in with the lawyer. Things are going to be very polite. And they're going to say, because you said this, we think maybe you might have done that. We're going to have to detain you. Do you think that the system of justice works in Belize like it does in America?
So, our conversation was pretty standard, pretty normal. There was nothing, I'd been with John for years, so I would have been able to notice if there was a shift in his energy, or if there would have been a need for concern that maybe he might want to do something to himself because of this decision. But that wasn't the case at all. Someone sent me a DM and said, "Oh my God, tell me it isn't true." And so then I just assumed that it had to be something about John, and I Googled, and then I found out that he had allegedly killed himself. And so that's how I found out, which is just terrible. No one should have to find out news of their loved one that way. Yeah, it was definitely a concern. Now, this was before he was in prison, and I think maybe he might have tweeted something again when he was actually in prison. I think something that alluded to the fact of if he was found in a similar way that Jeffrey Epstein was found.
Yeah.
It was not due to his own hand. Basically, was what he alluded to. I know a lot of people have suggested that something with his antivirus. I can't speak to that, so I don't know, if there was a way for him to get that information. But I will say this, with his antivirus, his first customers were, the government, CIA, FBI, the military even. So those were his first customers. And obviously he would have had knowledge of things. Things that the average person wouldn't have been able to have knowledge of. He always made sure to know any information that could possibly, of any possibly planned attacks or people planning on putting people in his life or trying to do him harm. He always had knowledge of that and always protected himself accordingly. No one really digs into John's perspective. Everyone just kind of sticks on the surface level of, oh, this crazy, paranoid, drunkard, he's already always partying, women, drugs, guns. And I just feel like that story has been told, over and over and over again, and I just would have liked to have seen someone tell the story from John's perspective, that way you could get a full picture of what was actually happening in his life, but it was entertaining. It was good to see him, again, obviously. But overall, I guess it did. I guess it accomplished what they set out to do, which was for it to be entertaining and to get people talking. There obviously, I guess from people looking from the outside looking in, it does look crazy, paranoid, and all that stuff. And maybe he was, and I think maybe he would have admitted that as well. However, there were people after him looking to do him harm. And so what was going on on the boat or during that situation was he had just closed his bank account in America, and $500,000 in cash was brought to him from those closed accounts. So he's got all of this cash on him. So you can imagine people are like literally probably, salivating at the mouth at, oh, we're going to get this big payday, so naturally he goes into protective mode or offensive mode. Now I'm going to let it be known that whatever ideas anybody may have, it's not going to be so easy for you to try to come and get this money. You're going to have problems. So it was very intense during that time. and obviously probably scary for everyone else. But and as out of control as he looked, it wasn't the case. He was very much in control, very much aware of what was happening. Once people fully understand his story, then you can understand why things look so crazy and chaotic from the outside, or just at the very least, just spread this interview so people understand that most importantly, he wasn't dead when they found him. I think this is the biggest misreporting that happened there. He was not dead. He was alive. He had a pulse. And that is my desire for the autopsy report, because I want to know, what happened to him.
Liberty is lost when governments decide what is right or wrong.